Ladies and gentlemen, as I'd earlier mentioned, it's time for our first panel discussion on the theme of success through brand strategy. This will be conducted by Mr. Rafiq Rangoonwala, as I mentioned earlier. He's the CEO of Quick Food Industries and the President of Pakistan Food Association. And the participants in this panel discussion will be Mr. Samar Hayat, CEO of Tapalti Private Limited, with Mr. Sami Wahid, Managing Director, Mondelez Pakistan Limited. And they'll be joined by Ms. Samar Sultan, the co-chairman of Shan Foods Limited. Please give them a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Our first panel discussion along the theme of success through brand strategy.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for inviting us over here. Before I start with questions and discussion, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves briefly. And I would also like to state that please write down any question that comes to your mind during this discussion. So at the end, we'll have 5 to 10 minutes depending on the time, Q&A session. So you can ask them questions because there's a wealth of experience sitting here on this stage. And let's take as much advantage as possible of their knowledge and their experience. So shall we start with ladies first, or we should say equal rights? And
let's do ladies
equal
first.
Opportunity always.
So go ahead, Sami.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Samar Sultan. I have about a decade's worth of experience in the food industry. I grew up in a entrepreneurial family and have kind of experienced business from a very young age. I'm co-chairperson now, and I have my own business which is in the manufacturing of sauces. That's me.
Okay, so I'll start. Firstly, I would like to mention this, that today I'm truly honored sitting right in front of Sir Aftab Tapal Saab. Something which is not mentioned in my profile, that I started my career with Tapalti as a management trainee in 2005. So truly privileged and honored. About me, I represent Mondelez International. Mondelez International, we are the biggest snacking player globally with a presence in about 130 countries and multiple snacking categories. So the likes of, in chocolate category, Cadbury, Toblerone, Milka. In biscuits, we have brands like Oreo, Turk, Ritz, and in beverages, Tang, and in gums and candies, brands like Trident. So I've been a part of this organization now for a period of about 7 to 8 years. From my professional career perspective, 17 years of my professional career, I've done only one thing, that I've marketed it and sold snacking and beverages brand. I also have experience, so I have a multi-market experience as well while working with Mondelez International. I've managed Gulf markets, North African markets that included Morocco and Egypt, and of course a vast experience in Pakistan as well. Currently, I'm working as the Managing Director for Mondelez Pakistan. So that's about me.
Just before we start with you, before coming here, I want to know what Mondelez does. Because Tapal and Shan are, mashallah, household names. So I went on to their website, and there are so many products that I couldn't count. I just gave up. So I mentioned this to Sami, and he said, we are still hungry. Man, what an appetite, I tell you. So I said, leave some for others as well. I mean, don't be so greedy. Anyway, okay, Sam.
Working? Hello? Yeah. Okay, so brief introduction. I currently in this, I have the honor of working at Tapalti. And before that, for 20 years, I worked for a company called Procter & Gamble in different parts of the world, including Saudi and Geneva for a few years, and then running parts of Africa and Middle East from Geneva, and then also Europe. And then lastly in Dubai for 9 years, but from Dubai also managing Africa, Middle East for Procter & Gamble. And whenever I see my friends from Africa, I get very happy because for 8 years I was responsible for Procter & Gamble Africa business, and spent a lot of time in Kenya, Uganda, etc. All these markets. So very close to my heart, and a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you very much.
You know, Parvez and Janu Saab made my life easy because in my panel there are 2 Samirs and 1 Sami. So I have 3 superstars over here. I would request you to please give them a round of applause. Now let's start with our discussion. Any one of you can answer this. You know, a lot of business families in our country especially, or in the subcontinent, when they started, most of them still, I could say, don't know even how to sign their name in English. They have built dynasties, and we know them. And now this new generation comes and they talk about strategies and brand equity, and they talk about this and they talk about that. I mean, there's a lot of resources and, you know, money and time that goes behind these things. Why not do the old-fashioned way? Why all these marketing and branding strategies and all this stuff? Why?
You want to take that, Samar?
Okay, well, first Okay, so I have a slightly different point of view on that question. I think, at least from what I can see, before people like me were born, there were brand strategies and marketing strategies and very successful corporate strategies in place at many of these companies, including, of course, what Aftab Saab and his team were doing already. So so my point of view on this is it's not a new phenomena to companies in Pakistan that have been brought by some new kind of magical generation. I think the legacy of the visionary pioneers many years before us was already to build very successful brands, have very successful brand strategies, build very strong brand equities, and that's why there are such powerful local and of course some international as well brands in Pakistan and international brands that have come out of Pakistan. So I'm a slightly different place on whether there's any new kind of incredibly different stuff being done. Now, of course, the idea is to keep changing with time, keep growing with time, and as consumers and markets evolve, I think everybody's trying to kind of keep up with the trends, etc. So, but anyway, I like the others' answer as well.
I'll add something to this. So maybe not in the jargon of it, but I agree with what Samar said, that there was a need, like in the case of my father, he identified a need in the market and he designed the product, designed the packaging, designed the brand story, and put it out there. And then consistently over the course of 3 or 4 decades, built on those things. He was 30-something when he started the company. So very much a young man, and innovation was part of the whole idea of it. And I think we continue to do that today with trying to identify areas where there is a demand, there's a gap, and then trying to fill it. So maybe we didn't have the words that we're using for the strategies today, but they still existed for sure.
Yeah, so I would like to just build on it, what Samar and Samar has said. The strategy was there, but it was not documented, and it was not well articulated, right? Like how it is being done today by the 3rd, 4th generations into the business. And I'll give some examples also, because I've worked Tapalti as well, and going back to the history of and success of Tapalti, correct me if I'm wrong, mixture tea blend was the first time that it was brought into Pakistan by Tapalti when it was managed through a Jodia Bazaar shop. Then the granular tea from Kenya was also for the first time brought into Pakistan by Tapalti. So the basic concept of how do you go and win the markets through bringing in differentiated or USP defined innovations was there, but probably not well documented or articulated. So, yeah.
So in other words, this brand strategy was always there. It's just that the word was not coined at that time and it was not structured the way it is today. So what I was trying to come to is that without a brand strategy, a brand doesn't stand. It doesn't have legs. It will not last long because you don't know what the hell you are doing, in other words, if you don't have a brand strategy. Okay, so my next question is that in this market, okay, let's say the first one more academic question. What do you think are the basic pillars of a brand strategy?
I'll take this question first. So I'll answer this question from a strategy of brand and also from an organization perspective, because I see there are quite a few entrepreneurs sitting here. So number one, having a strategy is very, very important, because it is very important for the organization and for the team to understand that what they are supposed to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years, right? So that 3 to 5 year clarification to the organization perspective is very, very clear one. And then how do you go and define it? So if I give our example, so our strategy definition is around 3 pillars around which the organization is standing. So one is that how you're going to define and drive the growth of the business. So within the growth, the brand strategy also comes into play. The category strategy also comes into play. So questions and answers like which categories to invest on which categories you don't need to invest on, those are answered. Any other innovation work that you would like to do, that also comes into play. And of course, and when you're working on your innovation, it's a whole lot work. You need to see it from the perspective of the demand spaces or the need states, etc., that are defined there. So growth strategy has to be very, very clear. Then the execution also, that how and what in the next 3 to 5 years the organization is going to improvise on its execution. I'll give an example from Pakistan perspective today. Digitalization today, we all know it is rapidly growing. So if the organization knows that they need to prepare themselves to be digital savvy in the next 2 to 3 years, then the organization today has to develop those capabilities. And third, and the most important pillar, that's how I see it in my organization, is the culture of the organization. That how you're going to retain and engage your team members, and how you're going to grow them, and how you are going to develop them from a capability perspective, which will help the organization to stay ready for the future opportunities.
So I agree with everything you said. For me, I think brand strategy really essentially means who do you want to be and how do you get there? And then what are the steps that you need to take in order to achieve that goal? So if you want to position yourself as a luxury brand, obviously then the communication, the packaging, the product has to be such that it can fit into that mold of a luxury product. If you're making a mass market product where you want the product to be as cheap as possible, the entire packaging, the whole value proposition of it has to match it. And then you create a communication, whether through advertising or word of mouth or taste trials, and you say, okay, this is the people who I want to target, and you start communicating with them. You do that long enough consistently and you'll get to where you want to go.
Yeah, I think, for me, the first question which I think we sometimes struggle to answer is, in fact, I remember I was on a training once, and we were already at pretty senior levels at Procter & Gamble. They put us in a room and they said, what is strategy? And you'll be surprised, even at that level, there were 8 or 9 different answers, right? So I think the first thing is, strategy is a choice. And what that means is, it's a choice of you're choosing to do something and choosing not to do something. Now when you bring that to a brand, it is a choice for making a brand stand for something, and then you're automatically excluding that brand will not stand for many other things. And a lot of times you will notice there's a big struggle with brands and brand managers and brand custodians, and that the struggle is in wanting to stand for too many things. So you want a brand to stand for quality, you want a brand to stand for value, you want a brand to stand for good price, you want a brand to stand for also innovation. So as you keep expanding that objective set, it gets more and more confusing, right? So you have to at some point make that choice, and it's a hard choice, and it takes a lot of work, because the choice is not done in the boardroom. The choice is done with the consumer, trying to understand consumer need, trying to understand what drives consumer preference on that particular product. It could be anything. Figuring out the target market and then figuring out what is their preference. It's a lot of work. It's not easy, otherwise everybody would be doing a great job in the world, and there's a lot of time we see a struggle to do a great job at this. So my perspective on this through experiences good and bad is that at times when we fail to make a clear, definitive choice and then stick to it, right? That's when brand strategy is, goes off and it gets very confusing. And I can, give you an example. I used to lead a brand for Procter & Gamble called Pampers, the baby diapers, right? So the choice that was made was that this is about baby development. The choice that was not made is that this is about great protection for the babies, or it's about great value, which is pricing, right? Or etc. So you can go in 50 different directions. Once you made a choice about brand that's about baby development, then everything you do, including what you do with the product, including what you do with pricing, including what you do with packaging, has to then be linked to the choice you've made. So it's a very complex exercise. But my experience is that majority of the time the struggle with brand strategy is the struggle to figure out that choice. And that's just my point of view.
Sorry, sir. I would just like to add
Please,
a
go
few
ahead.
points to what Samar has just said. And I think it's very important, and especially for the marketeers who start their career at the start. Many of the marketeers feel that advertising is everything, right? There's this article, it was not the article, this is something that I read in the book. There was this research that Harvard University did, and they did it on the marketeers, successful marketeers who had graduated from the university, to understand that what are the different sub-functions of marketing and from the importance and weightage perspective. I was surprised to see, and I think this goes in 2009 or 10 when I read about it, that they said that the role of advertising is only 15%. The major weightage of the work that you do to define and design a successful brand is on the strategy. So what does strategy means, right? So like what Samar said, making the right choices. So which segment to play into, that is one. Within the segment, you need to understand the need states of the consumer or the demand spaces. Is there any gap there in the market, right? Can you bring in a unique design product? And like there are many examples, even from Pakistan, and I mentioned a few, that when you go and design a unique product which goes and hits the need state gaps for the consumers also, and with that, if even your advertising is average, right, the product would sell, right? But if you go wrong on your strategy, on your product designing, or not hitting the right price points, etc., then even an amazing creative advertising would not work for the brand. And again, there are many examples around it. So brand strategy it's not just a word. It's about many things, right? Segments that you're going to play into, how you're going to design your 4, 5, and now it has gone up to 7 piece, and I've heard that now the recent people are talking about 8 to 9 piece as well. So spending time on the brand strategy, looking for the right opportunities, designing your product right, and hitting the right need state or demand spaces. If you do that right, then the chances are very thin that it would not work.
So in other words, if I would like to sum it up, the sum of these pillars are number one, to begin with, is to know who you are, what you stand for, and what you want to be. Because you can't be everything to everybody. And the companies who try to do that, an example comes to my mind. There's a brand called Jack in the Box in the United States. The Jack in the Box was known for its burgers, like McDonald's or Burger King, Whataburger. And then suddenly their strategy changed. They went into Tex-Mex food, like tacos and burritos, and then they went into pizzas, then they went to God knows what else. So I think they became, what they call it Urdu, choo-choo ka murabba, like they wanted to be everything to everybody, and they lost their identity. And when they lost their identity, they lost their market share. And the consumer dissatisfaction was to such an extent, then I think they had to shut down literally the business, because they couldn't deliver it. They couldn't deliver the customer promise. They couldn't deliver the quality of food. The availability was an issue because there were so many items on their menu. And the service just went to hell. So it is very important that first we decide who we are, what we want to be, and then find what most of the time we don't understand is we don't differentiate between primary and secondary target groups. See, when you plan your advertising strategy, you need to identify who your primary target is, who you want to go after, and then later on, like for example, McDonald's, their primary target is kids. That's their strength. Okay? But other brands like KFC and Pizza Hut, KFC is like food, finger licking good. That's their USP. And Pizza Hut is like sharing together under one roof with friends. So if you don't know who you are, what your target market is, then you can't do anything. You will be just totally lost in the marketplace. Okay, that's great. Now, and again, one piece I just want to mention is people. Most of the time we underestimate that piece. People is very important because they are the one who's going to do it for you. If you don't have the right people at the right place at the right time, no matter how good of a strategy you have, no matter what brand you have and the quality of food you have and the variety of food you have, nothing is going to work. It's the people. That's the most important piece also in this brand strategy. Now, in this Pakistani market, or I'm sure there are a lot of markets that our other guests can relate to, there's a crowd of unbranded options, especially in the tea and spice market. How do you differentiate, like as a Tapalti, how do you differentiate yourself among this crowd? And how do you grow your market share?
So I think firstly, this whole discussion about the power of brands is exactly this, which is, and pick another category. Let's pick another category then, because I'm biased to talk about tea, but let's do a bit of a different. We're all from tea, but if you look at other categories to learn from, shoes, right? If you go back in history, a Nike shoe versus an unbranded shoe that used to come into the US, versus some other, products that were available. The product, real product benefit was very marginal, right? The differentiation. But look at over the years what the power of a brand creation has done, right? In fact, then I'll take it one step further. All of us in this room, all of us, if you think, give it a second or two, you'll come up with a couple of brands, brand names, in various categories that you absolutely have very strong pull towards. It could be, Under Armour is a brand I'm these days, infatuated with for some reason. I don't even know why, right? But it's kind of snuck in there somewhere in my system. Food-wise, like you said, McDonald's, pizza. You go across categories, and every category you will figure out very quickly that there is this affinity that builds in your heart and mind that drives your choice. And it's usually to a symbol, a brand name, a logo, something, right? How many times would you have somebody saying, I just love all kinds of pizzas? You will, but in the majority of the time you'll say somebody saying, I love Pizza Hut, or I like going to Pizza Hut, especially, maybe not us, but there are many people who would. And you can go on and on through every category. So there is years and years and years of data that proves that the value creation that comes through the power of brands versus no brand is that it builds a space in your mind which then draws you to that choice. And sometimes you don't even analyze it that carefully when you're buying that product, right? Some people love Adidas, some people love Nike, some people have a very strong affinity for a certain car brand, right? Some people will buy a Toyota no matter what, right? And some people will buy a Honda because that's just their preference, right? Now, if there was unbranded cars all over the world, only, it would be a very, very different way to go about these choices. So I think one of the things that powerful branding does is that it drives consumer choice and creates a pull from every one of us. And that's great to see. There's value creation in it for, of course, the manufacturers of those brands. But there's also value creation in it for the consumer because you're satisfied when you're indulging your preferences. So that's my point of view.
Like for example, Tapalti, how do you differentiate yourself from this crowd? What do you think, this is what I stand for, this is what Tapal is all about, so buy Tapal? Because in this crowd, you have to grow your market share. You have to tell people to switch from a certain brand to yours. So in order to do that, you have to convince them. So what is your USP?
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of friends here from different companies and industries and the same industry. So let's think of it as any brand would do. Any brand in the world.
He's playing safe.
Yeah. Any brand in the world that wants to have consumers choose it versus its competition will do what people here were mentioning. They will ensure there is product preference, right? Because by the way, we all know this. Without product preference, there is nothing. Right? So there has to be a product preference, and then there has to be all the other subliminal things built in, which is you have to like the packaging, you have to like the pricing has to work for you, etc. These are all kind of the generic lecture of how consumer preference works. I think specifically in our industry, of course, it's a wonderful category in that sense because the consumer is extremely indulgent, right? The process is extremely indulgent, right? It's not a process of you use a toothpick and you don't care what it is. You're indulging in the brand through sit down, have a cup of tea, do it with your family. You do it, हमारे तो घरों में भी बड़ा there's pressure in Pakistan homes of who makes the tea and how good do they make the tea, etc., etc. So therefore, ensuring all those right boxes are ticked, and hopefully we tick them better than others, is what drives consumer choices.
Okay, very generic answers to a specific question, but it's all right. I understand your predicament. Samar, my life is easy. Samar, Sami. Yeah.
मैं थोड़ा सा इसको एक और तरीके से देखूंगी मसाले और चाय
because we have audience from other countries English
talk in both, so I was trying to do that, but I'll keep it mixed. So with spices as well as tea, I think one of the things that is very similar is that it's all based on taste preferences. Maybe in Punjab there are people who prefer it to be less spicy. In Sindh maybe the spice level is a little bit more. Some people like garam masala, which is your hot spices, they like it strong. Some people like it weak. And I think with tea as well, if you go to Thar, maybe they'll have a completely different taste palette. If you go to KPK, they're having it and they're making it in a very different way. I think regional play comes into play here, because even with Tapal, when I think of Tapal, I don't just think of it as a monolith. I think of it as danedar. I think of it as family mixture. I think of it as the Kashmiri chai they sell. So it's, it depends on the occasion. It depends on, maybe a friend of mine, I go to her house and she's having a specific kind of tea that they make specifically to there, and it requires a tablespoon of this and a tablespoon of that. I think those things allow us to kind of make it our own. But tea is like this. You have these preferences that people have, and then you have local players, smaller players that come in that are maybe competing with Tapal and these other big brands. Maybe not. Maybe they're targeting a completely different niche segment. And the person who's paying for that may not pay for Tapal or may not pay for a premium brand. So I think those things are important to notice as well. So you have a very large market, but everybody is playing a different game, essentially, which is how I think that there are so many people here, so many different brands, wholesalers. We all exist in this environment. Just like in spices, you have your entire Jodia Bazaar market, and you have a wholesale market, and then you have brands like Imtiaz who have come out now with their own brand name. And over the years, I guess that will also become a brand in its own right. So the challenge I feel with branding and marketing, a commodity essentially, is when you start scaling up. It's easy to make a really, really good product. It's all about blending the right quality ingredients. You can do it on a small scale. But when you start scaling up, how do you maintain the supply chain challenges? Brands that are able to overcome these issues when they scale, those are really the ones that are successful, essentially.
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question, and I'll answer this in two steps. So how important it is to invest on brands and show that value on the brand to the consumer. And if we look and reflect back, and I think in the 1940s and the 1950s, this transition started in USA, where people from the unbranded category started moving towards the brands and branded category, and Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and all those global brands started to merge. In Pakistan, this phenomena started in late 80s and 90s, and now, of course, it's at its peak. And how and why this has been happening, this is directly linked with the fact that as soon as the consumers or the potential consumers and shoppers would have exposure to the messaging, they will become more and more aware, and then they will know their choices also, and they're going to make their choices. So one piece of advice to any of the business owner who who owns different brands in Pakistan market or internationally, if you're not investing on your brands, please start doing it. And with this high influx of social media, we spend most of our time on social media now than TV, and it is more interactive and engaging. So the concept or the strength of brands and the consumer choices around the strength of and the equity of the brands would become more and more stronger. One. Number two, of course, creating value and investing on brand is very, very important. But the other thing is that how it should be done, like what Samar was talking about. So it is very important to understand the drivers of the category, right? So what are the top 3 or 4, 5 things that the consumer thinks about when they're making a purchase of that category? So few examples, when you think of Coca-Cola, I think of refreshment, right? And this is what I want from a cold beverage. So they are right there, and they're investing on their equity. When you think of safety in a car, you think of Volvo, right? Because they know that it's one of the very important category driver for the consumers to when they go and make that purchase. And similarly, there are multiple examples. So understanding that driver of the category first, and then seeing that how culturally, through the right set of insight, you are going to inspire the consumer to hold that message and to get that message is something very, very important. From our perspective right now, luckily, we don't have too many local competitors on the chocolate category or on our beverage brand. But we also have a joint venture business in Pakistan which manages biscuits. And biscuit is one of the most fragmented category that you would find in Pakistan. But like what I've said, that with the passage of time, and this is something that we have seen also, that the local players can only compete on very tactical things like, right? So tactical things like giving higher trade margins or probably a better value to the consumer from the perspective. And they did hold a large chunk of the market share. But with the passage of time, like how the consumers are becoming more and more aware of the messaging and about the social norms, etc., that is being converted to the branded category. And this is the history of biscuits category in Pakistan as well. Mid-80s, 90s, I remember when I was a child, I used to carry that brown wrapper and would go and buy the biscuits from the bakery. But I don't see my kids doing it, right? And I don't see people doing it in my circle. And the category transformed from unbranded to branded. So invest on brands, create more value, and give focus on consumer. It should be all the brand development work has to be consumer centric.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. Now we'll open the forum for question and answers. If you have any, please ask the question, and also who would you like to answer that question if you have any particular panelist in mind. That's great, no question. Okay, we have some hands. Hey, one second, let him give you the mic so the others can hear you.
Hello, my name is Ahmed, and I wanted to ask that with emerging trends of e-commerce, like how digitization is on the verge, so how do you think that, what challenges will you face with firms like Retailer and Bazaar and more like the Ras? What challenges would you see in supply chain methods? It's going to be more traditional or the new trends that you're going to follow?
Do you want any panelists particularly to answer this?
Yeah, the lady named Samar.
Our traditional, so some of these are, like for example, retail or bazaar, they're targeting, say, areas that your mainstream distributors are not. I find that your conventional distributors, if they are not able to, and they should have by now, in the last 2 years, have an arm that challenges or have an e-commerce arm, because right now they're very upset because they say all these new startups have come in and taken over our business. We have to be very careful when we're putting up promotions on e-commerce because we see a lot of shopkeepers also buying from these platforms. It is an area of concern for us because we don't want to ruin our conventional business chasing after e-commerce business, where I'm paying higher margins as well, in order to onboard myself onto these platforms. So I think we have to be wary, we have to be careful. I think we have to work in conjunction with them. You can't obviously ignore them. They're growing and they're there. We're already working with them. But I think that, I shouldn't say this, but I think data is important. They know where you're selling, whom you're selling, how much you're selling. I don't think that the implications of the data that they're generating, not just mine, but across all companies, that data will be resold at some point. That is the value of what they are doing. I think we, as manufacturers and distributors, we need to be wary of that. But of course, they're here to stay. You have to work with them. Just bear in mind that we don't know what the future will be. Because in the West, when you look at companies like Amazon, they know how much towels you're selling or how much tea you're selling. They know your margins, they know everything. They know where you're sourcing it from. So eventually, they're coming in and making the same thing and giving it on their website, attracting the people where they know they're most likely to buy. So it's easy to jump onto these things, but I think it's important to also be careful and sort of look long-term and see what will happen if we continue to work with these people. Because they're all startups. Today, they are owned by Pakistanis. Tomorrow, they may not.
Most of them are led by the bigger firms from outside.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean. Like, you don't know eventually who will own the business. So I think it's important to be careful. But that's just me with my very cynical outlook.
Good afternoon. My name is Abu. I'm from KTDA, Kenya. One of you, I don't remember exactly which, said that marketing without strategy won't get you very far. The corollary or the consequence question to be answered is what about the other way around? Marketing without strategy won't get you very far. Strategy without marketing? That's the first part of the question. The second part is basically unpack the two for me. Which activities do you put under marketing? Which activities do you put under strategy? Because I think in the normal practice they are meshed.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there is this famous saying that there's a very famous saying that, you know, the only strategy that the consumer sees, right, is in the final execution in the store. Consumer doesn't care. You're sitting in some boardroom, writing on a, flip chart, figuring out what strategy is going to be on what brand against what brand, etc., etc. Consumer never sees that. The consumer goes to the store, picks the best product for them at the right value, which is a combination of quality and price, and that will satisfy their need at that time. And if they find even the slightest disappointment in that equation, they'll switch to something else. And that's why the world we are in, I always try to remind people, it's called FMCG for a reason. Because the consumer makes the choice every single day, all the time, about what they're going to buy. So any day you get the execution wrong, you get the product wrong, the pricing wrong, the store execution wrong, the consumer will deselect you and move on. It's not like buying an air conditioner that you're going to buy once in 5 years or once in 10 years, or a car, right? It's the churn is very fast. So to your question, absolutely, I agree, by the way. Strategy that never sees the day of light because it was poorly presented to consumer. Let's not call it marketing. Let's call it consumer presentation, which is a combination of everything that we do on the brand, pricing, packaging, etc. is utterly meaningless. And you know, what activities go where? Frankly, sometimes this discussion becomes very theoretical. What you're trying to drive ultimately is two things in our industry, or in our categories: retailer support and consumer choice. Right? These are the only two things that ultimately matter. The retailer who is presenting your brand to the consumer, it could be an e-commerce retailer, a large, you know, a Walmart, or it could be a small mom and pop store in the neighborhood, right? Ultimately, it's a retailer who's presenting the product to the consumer. You have to have them with you, because without retailer support, you're not going very far at all, right? And without consumer choice, it's over also. These are the only two things, activity-wise, that I think need to be our key focus areas. Everything else is a support system that exists to deliver that choice. So that's my point of view on this. But please.
Do we have time for more questions? That's it. My apologies. Actually, we have run out of time. So I want to thank the panelists and also all of you for giving your attention and listening. I know, but I got the cue from here that because there's others.
You can meet
yeah,
me
in
on
the
the
break
side
maybe
out
if you
later,
don't
we
mind.
can-
This you know, lady and the gentleman would be
Lunchtime,
around.
yeah?
Next time, inshallah. Thank you
Lunchtime.
very much,
Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your time and patience.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful, a very insightful discussion comes to an end. I'd like you to stay a moment on the stage because we have a little token of appreciation that will be presented to our participants as well as the moderator of that discussion. Wonderful, insightful discussion, I must say. And it's great to hear our youthful speakers so articulate in every matter. Can we please have a round of applause for everyone on stage? And now I'll request